Okay. Um, okay, so what I'm going to do is just do a little presentation on motivational interviewing, and because that's a hard two words for me to say, I'm going to start transitioning to MI from here on out um, for substance use disorders, and particularly for a first episode population. So, really quick about me: I'm a psychologist. I've been a clinician since 1995. My first gig was a peer support specialist in New York, doing substance use disorder recovery. I'm currently at the centers where we have a first episode psychosis program that's just getting off the ground. And I've also done work as a supported employment program manager for a first like program, and been a CPST and program manager for a first like program. So I'll try and kind of like, talk about MI with SUDs through that kind of lens. So one way, like when people think about motivation, and particularly the folks who develop motivational interviewing, Miller Rollnick, sometimes they think about it as kind of elements of motivation, and I find this really helpful to think about. So thinking about motivation being comprised maybe of importance and confidence. So for example, if I'm going to stop drinking alcohol or curb my alcohol use, probably I'm going to need to believe that that's important to me, right? Like there's some kind of payoff that I'm going to get based on reducing or abstaining from alcohol. If there's really, to me, not much of an importance, I'm probably not going to do it, right? But maybe it's important to me. Yeah, I know it's affecting my liver and so forth and so on, but I'm not confident, right? Like I've tried and I've tried and I can't do it. Um, so it can be really helpful to kind of think about where is the person's what's their kind of barrier with regard to motivation. Is it an importance issue or is it a confidence issue? And obviously sometimes it can be both, and we know that motivation also fluctuates over time. So that's why I love people. We're really challenging, but lovable. And like sometimes we may be confident for a period of time and then we lose our confidence, and something may get important and then less important. But nonetheless, I found it helpful really to think about a change with the person I'm working at through this lens. So just to kind of level set a couple of definitions, MI is a motivational approach that's evidence-based, lots of evidence to support it, including with populations like that we're discussing. Brief, is applicable across a wide range of problem areas, literally from flossing your teeth to stopping smoking crack, right? And it's learnable by a broad range of helpers. And it's like one of the things that really all of us can do. Supported employment folks can do it, case managers can do it, therapists can do it, psychiatric providers can do it. It's something that we can all do. It's within all of our scope of practice once we've learned it. And another way of thinking about it, and keeping in mind that obviously some of the people we work with aren't as verbal, right? So there might be other ways they're communicating. Certainly, some of us who maybe use art in our work have found really helpful ways of having people communicate kind of through their art. Um, but in general, it's this idea of having conversations so people talk themselves into change based on their own values, interests, and experiences. And it is MI is kind of based on this, humanist philosophy that generally speaking, most people want to be healthier and want to be a better version of themselves, and they need a healing, helpful relationship to kind of make that happen. These are you're going to see four kind of dimensions of motivational interviewing. People would say this is the most important. It's really like the foundation of the therapeutic alliance. And the first one is partnership and collaboration. And it's this idea, this mindset that yes, you're an expert. You're an expert in, if you're a case manager in terms of case management work, the support employment around that, and you're bringing your expertise to the table, but at the same time, your client is an expert, and the families that you're working with, where these families are part of, are also experts. They know what has worked for them. They know what's not worked for them. They know what they're willing to do. They know what they're not willing to do. So it really is this mindset of this person or this system I'm working with, family, meaning we're equals, and we each have something to contribute. And it really is a mindset around that. The second dimension of the MI spirit is acceptance. And the first one is accurate empathy, which is kind of interesting. It's not just empathy, it's, gosh, I got to be accurate too. Meaning that not only do I think I know what's going on with the person, I actually do know what's going on with the person. And that takes a lot of like checks and balances, right? Doing reflections, like we'll go through in a moment, to check out your assumptions about like someone's worldview and seeing how they think about that. Absolute worth is just this idea. I always tell people when I'm doing this, and I do it to myself, because I still do private practice and see people, is we all probably have a certain type of client or family that kind of rubs us the wrong way, or annoys us or whatever. I think we're all human, and there's certain maybe behaviors or things that we find hard, maybe. And it really is that mental exercise of appreciating, even with that, like the worthiness of a person, and the strengths that they have, and likely how we know a lot of those things might have been very adaptive and may still be very adaptive to them in certain ways. I'm just basically seeing people as worthy, and as worthwhile and as competent. Um, Autonomy support is really just appreciating. We all know this, but sometimes I forget it. Is that the people that we work with will absolutely make their decisions, unless for some period of time that their freedom is taken from them, based on protecting their own safety or those of others, which is typically a brief period for people. People get to make all their own decisions, and they have the right to do that, even if we think those decisions are not the healthiest. And affirmation is like my son's principal used to say, is catching folks being good. A lot of time, especially when people are using drugs and alcohol, and I think that, I also would say I'm a person in long-term recovery as well. There's a lot of catching people being bad in that space for some reason. They're lying, they dirty, they messed with their urine, blah 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 blah. We have all these things that we say where it seems like there's a lot of emphasis on trying to catch people being bad rather than catching people being good. And affirmations is really so. For example, if you're working with someone and they've said they've been working on sobriety for a couple of months or whatever, and then they come to tell you, hey, you know what? I saw my old girlfriend, and we wound up picking up some alcohol, and then we wound up smoking some crack. That, I mean, you can clearly affirm that, right? Like, and I would say, because I'm from the South, dang, you are really courageous to say that. It takes a lot of courage to speak like that. And it does, right? That is honesty. That we sometimes we go straight to, oh, well, how come you were there? And didn't we talk about you not being with your old girlfriend and blah blah blah. I know, in that you may get to that kind of relapse prevention stuff, but in that moment, I think it's nice to acknowledge that's a person who did something really hard, for many of us to do. The third component is compassion, and that's basically being ethical. For the most part, people have used MI to do things like getting people into research projects and getting into the programs that's more for financial reasons than for the person's own well-being. So if you stick to your ethical codes and the policy and procedures of your organization, you should be good on compassion. And evocation is trying to figure out ways to get the person to communicate. And again, that might be through art, it might be through behavior, it might be through talking, knowing that people express themselves in very different ways. But it's trying to get the person to kind of do more of the talking in general or more of the communicating than what we're doing. You're going to see examples of all these, but this is kind of like the foundational skills of MI. Doing open questions, so things that aren't yes, no. Affirmations, again, catching people being healthy. Reflective listening, or those empathic statements that we make to somebody. Summaries are a really long empathic statement that we make to somebody. And informing is where, because we're collaborating with people, we might have information to provide with them, but the way you do it in MI is very collaborative, which I'll give an example in a moment. And these are some of the other kind of areas of MI that we'll go through as we proceed. Developing discrepancy, basically helping the person appreciate what they're doing and how that affects their overall goals. Rolling with resistance, basically we try and meet that with empathy, right? When someone doesn't want to change, that's absolutely their right. And our role then is to understand that better. And boosting self-efficacy, that gets at that issue when people are not feeling as confident, right? Like, how do we help people through our relationship feel more confident? And expressing empathy. And again, you'll see that a lot. And the research on substance use disorders in general suggests probably the most powerful thing that we can do is empathize with people. So back to like the beginning premise. So if someone has low confidence and low importance, and let's just talk about it from this example, drinking alcohol. To them, it's not really important to stop drinking alcohol, and they're also not confident they could do it. So typically at that point, you're working on the therapeutic alliance. Maybe you're doing that through continuing to assess their needs, strengths, preferences, values. Maybe you're collaborating on any healthy behavior change. I remember I was working with this guy. He was, anyways, when I would go to, I worked in a housing first building, and he would be drinking Steel Reserves at about 7 a.m. when I got, if y'all know, that's that high gravity alcohol. By the time I got to the building, he was already drinking. He had absolutely no desire to stop drinking. But we talked a little bit about like his vitamin deficiencies, and he started taking a multivitamin. Hey, I would count that as a win. It was in the direction of health. Maybe it helps his memory down the road. And it was what he was willing to do. And he was a step healthier in a way that worked for him than he was previously. Meeting basic needs, psychoeducation versus with the illicit, provide illicit method. And that's what I was saying in terms of informing. So a way you might do this, we just had this in our ACT program where a client was using snorting cocaine and was kind of in the belief that cocaine was pretty much all good and there weren't really any downsides to it. And we weren't really sure if this particular person understood in Cuyahoga County, a lot of the cocaine has fentanyl in it. And so the case manager basically said, hey, what do you know about fentanyl and cocaine? Didn't assume. And then the client said, I don't really know anything about it. And the case manager says, would it be okay if I share with you some of what's going on with the fentanyl and cocaine in Cuyahoga County? Client said yes. So he asked permission. First thing he did is asked if he knew anything about it, not assuming he didn't. Client didn't. Then he asked if he would want to know more about it. That's the illicit part. Client said he did. He said yes. So then the case manager then educated him about the overdose rates with fentanyl and in cocaine in Cuyahoga County. And then it's the last part. So he provided the information. The last part was eliciting again. What do you think about what I said? So you ask permission. Would it be okay if I teach you something? Client says, if they say yes, you teach. Once you teach, then you wonder, what do you think about that? It's a really, really empowering, respectful way to connect with people when you're trying to educate them about something. And also, by the way, if you're on the cover your backside end of things, if you ask, could I educate you about or talk to you about fentanyl and cocaine? If client says no, guess what? That's their right not to be educated. You document in your records, attempted to educate clients about harm reduction and da-da-da, client refused, right? That's fair. And then empathize again. And I think a lot of times we forget empathy has nothing to do with agreement. We do not have to agree to empathize, and oftentimes we may not agree with someone while we're empathizing. So this is that in the MI literature, they really emphasize when people are in low importance, low in confidence, to really focus on empathy. So someone saying, I won't go to any treatment groups, those people won't understand. So you might do what they call amplified reflection, kind of a strong one. There would not be the right support in those groups. It's a pretty strong statement. And again, you may not agree with that, but that's maybe kind of what that person's communicating, right? The coming alongside is a little kind of softer than that, but again, an empathic statement. You see little benefit to attending groups. And then emphasizing personal choice is another way you could do it. You want to figure out a different way to make that change, right? So these are some of the things you might be doing when someone is low importance and low confidence. Let's say they're high confidence, but low importance. Crack makes me, and this was a person I will never forget, a person I worked with as a case manager for quite a while. Asked him what he liked about crack, which is something that you do in MI as well. What do you like about the quote unquote unhealthy behavior? And he said, crack makes me feel powerful, and basically said he never feels powerful. So that's an incredibly important experience for him. And I could stop whenever I'm ready. That's what this guy's saying. So he's telling you he's confident, but he's telling you low importance, right? So this is where you might develop discrepancy. So is there a religious or spiritual viewpoint that is incongruent with their drug use? I don't know, maybe, maybe not. Is seeking employment maybe incongruent with their drug use? I don't know, maybe, maybe not. Is maintaining housing maybe incongruent with their drug use? I don't know, right? But, and this guy actually was wanting to buy a car, and periodically I would say, hey, how are you doing with like your savings towards buying that car? And generally he would say, not very good. I don't really have any money saved. And I might kind of gently say, hey, well, how do you think like the fact that you're smoking crack is affecting those savings? And your tone is really important. If you're to say, well, how are you going to be saving money when when you're smoking all that crack? That's probably not going to get the response you want. It's more of that kind of neutral question. Tone, I mean, how does smoking crack affect your finances? Right? Just like that, like you're asking about any other thing. Um, Other things you can do when they're high confidence, low importance. Just some reflections again. Those are empathic statements. Crack gives you a really important experience. That's what the person's saying, right? Also, they're talking about being confident. You're really confident about making changes. Or these open-ended questions on a scale from 0 to 10, how important is it for you to stop smoking crack? And then whatever number they tell you, you ask them why you're not a lower number. So, they gave you a 1, you ask, how come you're not a 0? And if they give you a 0, then again, you can just empathize. Okay, it's just really not at all important to you at this point in time. So what about when they're low importance? I'm sorry, low confidence and high importance. I really need to stop using meth because I got drug testing with my PO, but I've never been able to stop. So this person's telling you it's important. I know it's important. I just don't believe I can do it. So you're shifting focus, right? So you could again, in MI, reflections are always good. You value your freedom so much that you want to find a way, even if it's hard. So just an empathic statement, kind of saying a little different than what they're saying. Open question. This is a way of kind of getting a person to almost affirm themselves based on their own past experiences. Tell me about another time in your life you overcame something that seemed really impossible, right? And then they may have this thing that they say that then is like, oh yeah, I did do that. And it can actually help people feel confident towards doing something else. And here's some other things that you can do. Part of why you're doing a lot of affirming in motivational interviewing, it is to continue to let people know and let themselves know that they're worthy, they're capable, they do things, they've been successful, they have strengths, which is why you're trying pretty regularly in MI to find things to affirm. Highlighting their past successes. Hey, but I remember when you did this other thing you thought was hard. Tell me what that was like to do that. So you kind of helping remind them. Setting small goals and celebrating success. So, and research really does suggest people can taper their drug use. Some people, not all people. Sometimes we think it's got to be cold turkey. Not always. And by the way, if what they want to do is try and taper first, why don't we try? Maybe they'll do it. Or maybe they'll learn, okay, I can't taper. I need to go cold turkey, right? Um, encourage consideration of role models. I do this a lot. I may say, hey, do you know anybody kind of you relate to who's been in this situation? And sometimes you'd be like, yeah, this guy I grew up with, he had the same situation. Say, well, what do you think you could do like what he did? Um, so, helping people think about is their role models, or perhaps if there's a peer on your teams that maybe has had similar experiences, that could be something helpful for people to learn, because having a model obviously makes things seem more possible. And also just kind of in your whole tone of working with people is this kind of belief that relapses are something to learn from. It doesn't mean somebody failed or that someone's ineffective. It means just like I make 3 or 4 mistakes every day. I don't think I'm a failure, but I think, okay, that plan didn't work. I need to think about a different plan. So just kind of having that tone of thinking about relapse is more of a learning experience, rather than this thing that, that we kind of like beat people up about verbally, of course. Um, so then what happens if like someone is, they're actually confident and important, like, okay, you kind of sold me, or I believe it. Like, I really need to start getting fentanyl test kits because I'm not ready to stop smoking crack, but I want to make sure I'm not going to die of overdose. So you may get them again to talk about that a little bit. Like, okay, that's a great idea. What makes you want to do that now? Because then the person might say, well, I just knew about some friends who passed and it scares me a lot, so I got to really get it going. Again, this idea that people talk themselves into change. Affirming, again, like, that was a great idea. You're successful with that strategy in the past. Reflecting, keeping your apartment is so important that you're willing to look at a smart recovery website. And then lastly, kind of in MI and a lot of sort of models of change suggest that people are most likely to change when you develop some sort of SMART goal and collaboration with them. And so it's the specific part. So this particular person, they don't want to drink alcohol and use THC at the same time. Measurable, you could measure that. There could be 24 hours of between alcohol ingestion and THC ingestion, right? If you wanted to, you could somehow measure that, or they could qualitatively tell you that that's what they were doing. Achievable, this person thinks that that's possible. That's like a good first step for them. Relevant, they believe that the combination of those two drugs together is really detrimental to them, but they're not ready to stop either one. So, that's what they want to do. And I would argue as the clinician working with them, hey, not using two drugs together is in the direction of health. So I can get behind that. That makes sense to me. And lastly, maybe they want to work on that for the next 7 days. Like their goal is to try that out for 7 days, and they'll talk to us about it when they're done. Those are my references and things. So yeah, so thank you all